What would you do if you suddenly lost everything, and no one was left by your side? The question hung in the air, chilling the spine and piquing curiosity. For most, it was an unsettling thought, a question that evokes fear, loss, and a sense of helplessness. But for John Matthews, a young, ambitious investigative journalist, it became the driving force behind his next big story. A story that would shake the world, unravel secrets within the Vatican, and involve one of the most unexpected names in tech, Elon Musk. It was a cold Tuesday morning when the world learned that Pope Benedict XVI, the 265th Pope of the Catholic Church, had passed away. The news was a shock to millions, but for John, it felt different. As the hours ticked by, he felt an unexplainable pull towards the story. Something about the way the Vatican handled the situation, the sheer amount of secrecy surrounding his death, didn't sit right with him. John had been a journalist for 5 years, working for a modest but growing news outlet in New York. He had covered everything from local politics to minor international conflicts, but this felt like the biggest story he would ever have the chance to report. This wasn't just another headline, this was a mystery that could rewrite history. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The words on the screen from a well-known news anchor flickered in the corner of his monitor, reminding John of how the media loved to spin sensationalism. But this was different. This story, if true, had implications that could change everything, for the Catholic Church, for the global community, and for powerful figures like Elon Musk, who, strangely, had already made his first public comment on the matter. The rumors about Pope Benedict's death had started to swirl almost immediately. At first, it was reported as a natural death, an elderly man passing peacefully. But as more information leaked out, it became clear that there was more to the story. Officials at the Vatican, usually so composed and controlled in their public demeanor, were giving conflicting statements. First, it was announced that Pope Benedict had died in his sleep, peacefully in the Vatican residence. Then came an unexpected statement from a Vatican spokesman, suggesting that the Pope's health had been declining faster than anyone had let on. John couldn't shake the feeling that there was something they were hiding. The secrecy felt too orchestrated, the delay in the official announcement too deliberate. His instincts as a journalist told him this was the beginning of something much bigger than anyone realized. He felt a fire in his belly. This was his opportunity, his big break. The phone rang, snapping John back to reality. "John Matthews?" a voice asked on the other end. It was an unfamiliar voice, clipped and direct. "Yes, speaking. You've been selected to investigate the death of Pope Benedict XVI, the voice continued. "We believe there are forces at play here that should not be overlooked. We need someone with your expertise." John felt his heart race. His mind spun. He had suspected something was off, but this was an invitation to dive straight into the lion's den. "Who is this? And why me?" John asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though his pulse was quickening. "The less you know, the better for now," the voice replied. "But your recent article on the influence of tech billionaires in global politics was noted. We need someone who isn't afraid to go after the truth, no matter where it leads." The line went silent for a moment, before the voice added, "And trust me, this leads straight to some very powerful people. Be careful, John." Before John could respond, the call ended. He sat there for a moment, staring at the phone, trying to process what had just happened. His mind raced with possibilities, but the one that stood out the most was Elon Musk. The name had been floating around in the news for the past few days in connection with the Pope's death. Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur, known for his work with SpaceX, Tesla, and now his involvement in numerous global initiatives, had tweeted about the Pope's passing, drawing attention to the Vatican's strange behavior in the days following the announcement. Was Musk somehow involved? Was he privy to information that others weren't? The pieces of the puzzle began to form in his mind. The Vatican. The Pope. Elon Musk. Was there a connection? And if so, what kind of conspiracy was John about to uncover? John leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm his racing thoughts. The clock on his desk ticked loudly, each second reminding him that time was ticking. The world was already beginning to speculate about the circumstances surrounding Pope Benedict's death, and it was only a matter of time before someone with the right resources and connections, dug too deep and found the truth. He had to be the one to find it first. As the day passed, John began to piece together his plan. He needed to go to Vatican City, interview sources, and uncover any inconsistencies. The first step would be to gather as much information as possible, official statements, leaked documents, and any eyewitness accounts that might exist. He had no idea how far the rabbit hole went, but something told him that this was no ordinary investigation. Elon Musk had made it clear that he was watching the situation closely. There was something about the way Musk had phrased his tweets that made it seem like he knew more than he was letting on. Maybe Musk wasn't just reacting to the situation like everyone else, maybe he was involved. John's mind buzzed with questions, but one thought kept repeating: this story was bigger than anyone could imagine. The phone call from the mysterious source, the strange involvement of Musk, and the death of one of the most powerful figures in the world of religion. The story was already taking shape, and John knew that if he played his cards right, this could be the breakthrough he had been waiting for. He had no idea what he was walking into, but one thing was certain: he couldn't turn back now. This was just the beginning. The chapter closed with a shot of John packing his bag, pulling out a notebook, and making one final check on his passport. The weight of the task ahead pressed on him, but there was no turning back. The investigation had begun. And so, the world would soon learn that the death of Pope Benedict XVI was no accident. The story behind it would go deeper than anyone could have ever anticipated. Even Elon Musk couldn't ignore it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? John Matthews wasn't born into a world of privilege or wealth. Raised in a modest home in Queens, New York, he had learned early on that success didn't come easy. His parents, both immigrants, worked tirelessly to provide for him and his younger sister, Maria. His mother, a schoolteacher, and his father, a mechanic, instilled in John the values of hard work, resilience, and the importance of asking questions, something he would carry with him throughout his life. Growing up, John often felt out of place. He was the quiet, introspective kid in school who always had his nose buried in a book, questioning everything around him. While other kids spent their time playing video games or hanging out, John was devouring novels, news articles, and anything that could offer him a glimpse into the larger world beyond the confines of his small neighborhood. His love for writing and the truth led him to pursue a degree in journalism at New York University. His years at NYU were formative. He learned to hone his craft, chase down stories, and, most importantly, navigate the ever-evolving landscape of media. It was here that he first understood the power of a well-timed investigation, how one piece of information could change everything. But as much as John loved the idea of uncovering hidden truths, there were times when the stories felt personal. His father's death when John was just 19 left a deep scar, one that pushed him to seek answers even more fervently. His father had died of cancer, but the medical system had failed them in numerous ways. No one had warned them about the risks of misdiagnosis, and no one had offered any sort of meaningful assistance in his father's final months. The healthcare system seemed to work for some, but not for people like his father. That sense of injustice, that feeling of being helpless in the face of larger systems, had propelled John into investigative journalism. He wanted to uncover the stories that were buried, the ones that didn't get the headlines but shaped the world in unseen ways. Despite his growing success as a journalist, John had struggled with the loss of his father. That grief fueled his work, but it also left him emotionally distant. He threw himself into his career, neglecting his relationships, including the one with Maria, his younger sister. She had tried to get him to open up about his feelings, but John found it easier to bury the pain and focus on the stories he was chasing. Maria, who had become a successful therapist in the years after their father's death, often worried about John. She could see the toll his obsession with uncovering truth was taking on him. "You're pushing people away, John," she had told him during one of their last conversations before his move to the city. "You can't just live for the story. At some point, you need to live for yourself." But John didn't listen. He couldn't. The drive to find answers was too powerful. When John moved to Manhattan after graduating, he landed a job at the New York Review, a small but respected investigative outlet. It was there that he had his first real taste of what it meant to uncover a major story. His exposé on the influence of tech moguls on political decisions had made waves in the media world. For the first time, he felt like his voice had weight, like the work he was doing could truly make a difference. But no story had ever felt as important as the one he was about to dive into. The death of Pope Benedict XVI. The mystery surrounding it. The involvement of Elon Musk. Everything pointed to something larger, something sinister. John sat in his modest apartment, the evening light fading as he reviewed the information he had already gathered. His laptop was open, and scattered across the table were a few key documents, Vatican statements, interviews, and reports from various news outlets. Despite the wealth of information, something still didn't add up. There was too much ambiguity in the details surrounding the Pope's death. The lack of transparency from the Vatican was troubling, but it was the strange involvement of Musk that made John feel like this was more than just another high-profile death. Musk, a man who had reshaped entire industries and conquered the modern world of technology, had always fascinated John. The eccentric billionaire had built empires out of ideas that seemed impossible to most people. But lately, he seemed to be getting more involved in political and social issues. His comments on the Pope's death had been subtle, but they had stood out among the flood of reactions from other public figures. Musk had spoken out against the secrecy surrounding the event and hinted at larger forces at play. Was it just a coincidence? Or was Musk trying to tell the world something? John had a gut feeling that this was no ordinary story. It was bigger than the Pope's death. It was about the power dynamics at play in the world today, the intersection of religion, politics, and tech. And for some reason, Elon Musk, a man with more power and influence than most world leaders, was involved. As John sat back in his chair, lost in thought, a knock at the door startled him. He stood up quickly, his heart racing. Who could it be at this hour? He didn't have many visitors. He hesitated for a moment before opening the door. Standing on the other side was a tall man in a dark suit, holding an envelope. He looked like someone who didn't want to be seen, but his presence was unmistakable. The man was middle-aged, his face stern, with sharp features that conveyed a sense of purpose. "Are you John Matthews?" the man asked in a low, steady voice. John nodded cautiously. "Who are you?" "I'm here to deliver a message," the man said, holding out the envelope. "You'll find what you need inside." John took the envelope, his fingers brushing against the cold paper. As he opened it, he found a single sheet of paper with a cryptic message. "You're getting closer, but you're not there yet. Be careful who you trust." John's heart skipped a beat. The message was both a warning and a sign that someone, or something, was watching him. He closed the door, locked it, and sat down at his desk, the weight of the message sinking in. Someone didn't want him to uncover the truth. But that only made him more determined. John knew one thing for sure, this investigation was going to change everything. It was no longer just about the Pope's death. It was about something far larger, and he was going to find out exactly what it was. And as he read the note one last time, he whispered to himself, "I won't back down." The next morning, John Matthews woke up with a sense of urgency gnawing at him. The mysterious note from the night before only deepened the tension he had felt since receiving the phone call. It was clear to him now, someone was trying to stop him. The question was, who? And why? John had been investigating powerful figures and institutions for years, but the fear he felt now was different. This wasn't just a corporate scandal or a political cover-up. This was something much bigger, an intricate web involving one of the most sacred institutions in the world, the Vatican. As he sat at his desk, the sunlight filtered in through the half-open blinds, casting long shadows across his cluttered room. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but his mind was elsewhere. What was he really dealing with here? Pope Benedict's sudden death, the secrecy surrounding it, had already raised red flags. But the cryptic message in the envelope, the fact that someone was warning him to stop, made him realize that he was up against forces much more dangerous than he had initially thought. John's first move was to reach out to his trusted contacts, people who could help him dig deeper into the Vatican's operations. He couldn't do this alone. The Vatican was a fortress of secrecy, its walls built on centuries of tradition and influence. He needed inside information, something that could give him the key to unraveling the mystery. He dialed the number of Father Thomas O'Connor, a former priest who had left the Vatican years ago and now worked as a consultant for various international organizations. John had worked with Father O'Connor on a few smaller stories, and the priest had always been a reliable source. "Father O'Connor, it's John Matthews," John said as the phone rang. "I need your help with something important. It's about Pope Benedict's death." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh. "I figured you'd be calling soon," Father O'Connor said in his gravelly voice. "I've been hearing rumors. But you need to be careful, John. The Vatican is not a place you can just waltz into and start asking questions." "I know," John replied, his voice steady. "But something doesn't add up. There's more to this story, and I think I'm getting close to something big." Father O'Connor hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "If you're serious, you're going to need more than just information, John. You're going to need protection. The Vatican doesn't like people digging too deep, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep their secrets buried." "I'm prepared for that," John said, determination in his voice. "I need you to help me get access to the people who know what really happened." Father O'Connor sighed again. "I'll see what I can do, but you need to be careful. The people you're dealing with, they don't play by the same rules we do." John could hear the concern in Father O'Connor's voice. It wasn't often that the priest sounded this cautious. "I understand," John said, his mind already racing ahead to the next step. "I'll be in touch soon." "Thanks, Father." He hung up the phone, his thoughts swirling. Father O'Connor's warning was enough to make him pause, but it also made him even more resolute. Whoever was behind the Pope's death, and the strange silence surrounding it, was not going to make this easy. A few hours later, John's phone buzzed. It was a message from a number he didn't recognize. It was a simple text. "Be careful where you dig. Some things are better left buried." John's pulse quickened. Another warning. But this time, the message felt personal. Someone was watching him, someone who didn't want him to uncover the truth. He stood up and paced the room, trying to make sense of the situation. Every move he made seemed to be leading him closer to something dangerous. But what was it? The Vatican? Elon Musk? Was there a connection between the two, or was the mysterious billionaire just a pawn in a much larger game? The next day, John arrived at his office to find a stack of documents waiting for him. His assistant, Laura, had left them on his desk. As he skimmed through them, he found several reports detailing the Pope's death, but they were all missing key information. The reports described the circumstances surrounding the Pope's passing as peaceful and expected, yet the contradictions were glaring. Some of the statements contradicted each other, while others hinted at a deeper, more unsettling truth. It was clear that the Vatican was trying to control the narrative, but why? Among the documents, one stood out. It was a confidential report detailing a series of meetings between the Pope and a number of influential people, including an enigmatic businessman with close ties to Elon Musk. The name was blacked out, but the details were enough to send a chill down John's spine. The report described a series of secretive discussions about the future of the Catholic Church, its relationship with tech giants, and the Vatican's financial dealings. Could this be what Musk had been alluding to in his cryptic tweets? Was he somehow involved in this web of power and secrecy? John's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on his door. He looked up to see Laura standing in the doorway, holding a fresh cup of coffee. "You're looking more intense than usual, John," she said, offering him the cup with a half-smile. "What's going on?" John didn't take the coffee. He stood up, his mind racing. "You know that story I'm working on about the Pope's death? There's something strange happening here. Something bigger than just an old man passing away. I think we're dealing with a massive conspiracy." Laura raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, a conspiracy?" "I'm not sure yet," John replied, his voice low. "But it involves more than just the Vatican. There's a connection to tech moguls, to Elon Musk. Something doesn't add up." Laura set the coffee down on his desk. "John, you've always been good at uncovering stories, but this sounds dangerous. Are you sure you want to keep going down this road?" John looked at her, his jaw tightening. "I have to. I need to know the truth. People are trying to stop me, and that just makes me want to dig deeper." Laura gave him a worried look. "Just promise me you'll be careful. If you get in too deep, there's no telling what kind of people you'll be dealing with." John nodded, determination in his eyes. "I'll be fine. I've come too far to turn back now." As John sat back down at his desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to spiral out of control. The Vatican, Elon Musk, and the mysterious forces trying to keep the truth buried, they were all part of a larger game. And John was right in the middle of it. The rising conflict was just beginning. The deeper he went, the more dangerous it would become. And there was no turning back now. The next few days passed in a blur for John Matthews. The cryptic messages, the missing pieces of the puzzle, and the rising tension in the investigation all weighed heavily on him. As he pieced together the evidence, the feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. He was certain that someone, or something, was always just a step behind him. John had always been a man of logic and reason, but the more he dug into the death of Pope Benedict, the more he realized he was stepping into a world that defied those simple rules. Power, religion, and technology had all become intertwined in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. Yet, he felt he was getting closer to something big. He could almost feel it, the truth was just within his grasp. The phone rang one afternoon, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the caller ID. It was Father O'Connor. "John, I've got something," the priest's voice crackled through the phone. "You need to come meet me. It's time to take the next step." John felt his stomach tighten. "Where?" "The old church on St. Mark's Place." "I'll be waiting." John arrived at the church an hour later. It was a quiet, somber place nestled in one of Manhattan's quieter neighborhoods. The building, aged but sturdy, stood as a relic of another time, its brick facade covered in creeping ivy. As John stepped inside, the musty smell of incense and old wood filled the air. Father O'Connor was sitting in the front pew, his face pale but determined. "John," the priest said, his voice low, as if afraid to be overheard. "I've been digging into this for weeks now. And I've found something that will change everything." John sat down beside him, leaning forward with bated breath. "What did you find?" Father O'Connor pulled out a folder from his jacket and slid it across the pew to John. The folder was thick, containing several reports, handwritten notes, and photographs. John opened it carefully, scanning the contents. The first few pages were familiar, articles about the Pope's death, statements from the Vatican, and testimonies from several high-ranking officials. But as John flipped through the pages, he found something else: internal Vatican memos, cryptic notes about meetings with a tech billionaire, and several references to Musk. "This is unbelievable," John murmured as he examined the documents. The Vatican was in talks with Musk? About what? Father O'Connor nodded gravely. I've been digging into Musk's interests in the Vatican, and I think it's deeper than you realize. Musk isn't just a businessman anymore. He's trying to reshape society, and the church might be one of the most powerful ways to do that. There's talk of collaborating on a project, something that involves not just religion, but global influence. If the Pope's death wasn't by natural causes, then this might be the key to understanding why. John's pulse quickened. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Musk, with his obsession with technology, space exploration, and reshaping humanity, wasn't just interested in business. He wanted power, the kind of power that could change the world. "Father," John said, his voice shaking slightly, "why is this just coming to light now? Why hasn't anyone said anything?" Father O'Connor took a deep breath, his eyes dark with worry. "Because this goes beyond the Vatican. If people find out what's really happening, it will shake the foundations of power. Governments, corporations, they all have something to lose. No one wants to open this can of worms. But if we're going to get to the truth, we have to keep pushing." John nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a journey into the unknown, a journey that could cost him everything. But it was a journey he had no choice but to take. Later that night, John sat at his desk, the flickering glow of his laptop casting long shadows in the room. He carefully reviewed the documents Father O'Connor had given him, cross-referencing them with the notes he had already collected. The connections were undeniable. Musk's interest in the Vatican was far more than just a passing curiosity, it was a calculated move, a partnership that could give him access to the most influential organization in the world. John could already hear the questions buzzing in his mind. What did Musk want with the Pope? Why would the Vatican entertain such an alliance? And most importantly, what was the true nature of the deal between them? As he scrolled through the documents, one final report caught his eye. It was a confidential letter from a high-ranking Vatican official, dated just 2 weeks before Pope Benedict's death. The letter referred to an urgent meeting with Musk to discuss future plans for humanity, but there was one line that stood out. "The Pope's passing will open the door to the next phase. Our involvement must remain undisclosed until the world is ready." John felt his breath catch in his throat. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was orchestrated. The Pope's death, the secrecy, the strange involvement of Musk, it all pointed to a much larger plan. A plan that was unfolding right before his eyes. But as John continued his research, he felt the weight of his investigation grow heavier. It was no longer just about uncovering the truth. It was about survival. The deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. He was being watched, he could feel it now more than ever. And there was no telling how far those who wanted to keep the truth hidden would go to stop him. His phone buzzed again, this time a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging. You're too close." John's heart raced. The message was clear, whoever was behind this was trying to shut him down. But he had come too far to stop now. As he sat back in his chair, he looked at the documents spread out before him. His path was clear. He would follow the trail wherever it led, no matter the cost. The answers were out there. And John Matthews was determined to find them. John Matthews stood at the edge of the city, the skyline of Manhattan sprawled before him. The weight of everything he had uncovered pressed heavily on his shoulders, but it was nothing compared to the danger that was closing in around him. The deeper he had dug, the more intense the threats had become. He was no longer just a journalist uncovering corruption, he was a man on the brink of exposing a global conspiracy, and the people behind it would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. The documents from Father O'Connor had given him a clearer picture, but the revelations were so unsettling that he found it hard to process everything all at once. The Vatican, the Pope's sudden death, Elon Musk's involvement, these were not coincidences. The pieces were all falling into place, and John realized that the stakes had never been higher. What he had uncovered was far more than a simple story, it was a key to something far darker. The letter from the Vatican official had haunted him, the chilling words still echoing in his mind, the Pope's passing will open the door to the next phase. Our involvement must remain undisclosed until the world is ready. What was the next phase? And who was ready for it? John's phone buzzed again, a message flashing on the screen. This time, it was from Father O'Connor. "We need to talk. It's urgent. Meet me at the old church." The urgency in the message sent a cold chill through John's body. He had a feeling that whatever was about to unfold, it was going to change everything. The air inside the old church was thick with the smell of incense and the weight of unspoken words. Father O'Connor was waiting in the same pew, his face drawn and weary. His eyes flickered nervously around the room, as if he were expecting someone to walk in at any moment. "John, you're not going to like what I'm about to tell you," Father O'Connor said, his voice low and tense. He leaned closer, as if sharing a secret with someone who might not walk away from it. "The people you're dealing with, they're not just interested in power. They're playing a game of global control. The Vatican's involvement with Musk. It's bigger than you think." John's heart pounded in his chest. "What do you mean?" Father O'Connor swallowed hard. "There's a prophecy, a very old one, hidden deep within Vatican archives. It speaks of a time when the Church would need to partner with a visionary, someone who could bridge the gap between the old world and the new. Musk, in his own way, believes he is that visionary. He thinks he's the one who can lead humanity into the future." John sat back, stunned. "A prophecy? You're telling me this is all part of some grand design?" Father O'Connor nodded grimly. "Yes. But it's not just about faith. It's about control. Musk's technology, his visions for the future, he sees the Church as a way to legitimate his power. He needs the Vatican's blessing to push forward with his plans. And that's why the Pope's death was no accident. It's why they've been so careful about controlling the narrative. They needed a new Pope in place to align with Musk's agenda." John's mind was reeling. But why keep it a secret? Why kill the Pope if they just wanted control? Father O'Connor sighed deeply. The Pope wasn't supposed to die. At least, not yet. But the Vatican's leadership was divided. There were factions that wanted to maintain the Church's traditional values, while others, those in power now, saw Musk as the future. The Pope was in the way of that vision. John's chest tightened as the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just a power struggle, it was a war for the soul of the Church itself, and Elon Musk was playing a central role in it. The message of the Vatican's leadership was clear: revolutionize, or be left behind. Father O'Connor leaned in, his voice shaking. "John, there's one more thing you need to know. The Vatican doesn't just control faith, they control wealth, too. And Musk, he needs that wealth to push his projects forward. The space exploration, the artificial intelligence, the world-changing technology he's working on, he needs the Church's resources. He needs its influence." John swallowed hard. It all made sense now. Musk had always been about disruption, about shaking up the status quo. But this? This was a whole different level. "So, the Vatican is backing Musk because of his technological empire," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're making a deal to secure their place in the future." Father O'Connor nodded, his face grim. "Yes, but not everyone agrees with it. There are still people in the Church who want to preserve its integrity, to keep its connection to the people rather than aligning with technology and power. They'll stop at nothing to prevent Musk's agenda from moving forward." John felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. "And that's why the Pope had to go." "The Pope's death wasn't just an accident," Father O'Connor said. "It was orchestrated. The forces behind it are much bigger than we realized." As the priest's words sank in, John felt an overwhelming sense of dread. He had come so far, but now the truth was more dangerous than ever. If what Father O'Connor was saying was true, he had uncovered the largest conspiracy of his career, one that reached far beyond the Vatican, and far beyond Musk's tech empire. And yet, despite the danger, John knew there was no turning back. The truth had been uncovered, and it was time to expose it, no matter the cost. Father O'Connor stood up, his face lined with worry. "John, this is bigger than both of us. You need to be careful. They're watching you." John nodded slowly. "I've already been watched. I won't stop now. I'm going to take this all the way to the top." As he turned to leave the church, a shiver ran down his spine. This wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. It was about survival. The world was about to change, and John Matthews was standing at the center of it all. That night, as he sat alone in his apartment, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to be caught in a storm he could not control. But the drive to find the truth was stronger than his fear. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it. The pieces were in place, and the final revelation was within reach. All he had to do now was expose it to the world. The days following his conversation with Father O'Connor were a whirlwind of sleepless nights and relentless investigation. John Matthews knew that the deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. The stakes had been raised, and there was no going back. The conspiracy surrounding the death of Pope Benedict XVI, the Vatican's alliance with Elon Musk, and the secret plans to reshape the future of the Church were far darker than he could have imagined. It was a game of global power, and the players were willing to do anything to control the narrative. John sat in his cramped apartment, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his face as he reviewed the mountain of documents he had accumulated. The pieces were finally falling into place, but the bigger picture was still eluding him. The involvement of Musk, the cryptic prophecies, and the Vatican's maneuvering had left him with more questions than answers. But there was one thing he was sure of now: the Pope's death was not just a tragic event, it was a catalyst for something much bigger. He ran his fingers through his hair, frustration mounting. He had made connections, followed leads, and uncovered hidden truths. Yet there was still one question that gnawed at him: why? Why had Musk, a man known for his vision of a technological future, been so intent on allying with the Vatican? What was the Pope's true role in all of this, and why had his death been orchestrated to create a new world order? It was then that John received a message from an encrypted number, one he had come to recognize all too well. It was Father O'Connor. "Meet me tonight. The truth is worse than we thought. We have to stop this before it's too late." John's heart skipped a beat. It was a message of urgency, but it also filled him with dread. What more could there be? Had they underestimated the scope of the conspiracy? He couldn't afford to waste any time. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat, locked his apartment door, and headed toward the old church where they had met before. When John arrived, the church was dark, its ancient stone walls looming like silent sentinels. The night air was cold, and a sense of foreboding settled over him as he stepped inside. Father O'Connor was already waiting for him in the same pew, his face pale and weary. "John," the priest said quietly, "I wish I didn't have to tell you this. But we're out of time." John's pulse quickened. "What is it? What did you find?" Father O'Connor hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folder. He slid it across the pew, his hands trembling slightly. This is everything. The final piece of the puzzle. The prophecy, the death of the Pope, and Musk's involvement, it's all connected. But there's something much darker at play. John opened the folder, scanning the contents. His eyes widened as he saw a collection of old documents, handwritten texts, historical records, and photographs dating back centuries. But what stood out most was a single letter, stamped with the seal of the Vatican. The letter was from a century-old correspondence between powerful figures in the Vatican and a mysterious organization called the Order of the New Dawn. The letter read: "In order to fulfill the prophecy, the Pope must step aside. The Church must embrace the future, not just in faith, but in control. With the advent of new technologies, we must align ourselves with those who will lead the way in this new world order. The death of Pope Benedict will open the door to this new alliance, and the next leader of the church must be one who embraces progress and vision. The chosen one will be the key to ushering in this era. John's blood ran cold as he read the words. The chosen one was Musk. The prophecy had been referring to him all along. His vision of the future, the merging of faith and technology, was not just about progress, it was about control. Musk had been positioned to lead the church into a new age, a future where technology, wealth, and power were all intertwined. "Father," John whispered, "this is bigger than I thought." They killed the Pope to clear the path for Musk. Father O'Connor nodded gravely. "Yes. But there's more. The Order of the New Dawn isn't just a group of powerful men. They're an ancient sect, believed to have influenced the Vatican for centuries. They see themselves as the architects of the future. They believe the church must adapt or perish, and Musk is the key to their vision." John's mind raced. This was no longer just a story about power and politics, it was a story about control of the very soul of humanity. The Vatican, the Church, and Musk were all part of a larger game, one that could reshape the future of civilization itself. But why now? John asked. Why is this happening at this moment in history? Father O'Connor's eyes darkened. Because Musk has the technology, the wealth, and the vision to push humanity forward. He believes he can fix the world's problems. And the Vatican, with all its power and influence, has the ability to legitimize his mission. Together, they're going to change the world. But they're going to do it on their terms, using the church as a vessel for control. They believe that in order to save humanity, they must guide it, by any means necessary. John felt his stomach turn. The implications were terrifying. This wasn't just about an alliance between a tech mogul and a religious institution. This was about shaping the very future of society, using the power of faith, technology, and wealth to control the masses. The Pope's death was merely the beginning. The future of the Church, and the world, was at stake. He looked at Father O'Connor, his voice urgent. We have to stop this. We have to expose them before they can carry out their plans. Father O'Connor shook his head, sorrow in his eyes. It's already too late, John. The wheels are in motion. Musk is already in control. The next pope will be the one who carries out his vision, and the church will be forever changed. We can't stop it now. John's heart sank. But we have to try. As John stood up, he knew there was no turning back. The truth was out there, and it had to be exposed. The world had to know what was happening, even if it meant risking everything. The Vatican, Elon Musk, and the Order of the New Dawn had already started reshaping the world in their image. The death of the Pope had been their first step. But John Matthews was determined to make sure the final chapter of this dark story would not be written without the truth being told. The battle was just beginning. John Matthews sat in his car, parked on the side of the road, staring out at the towering headquarters of SpaceX. The glowing lights of the building shimmered in the dark, its sleek, modern design a far cry from the traditional institutions he had spent years studying. But for John, it was a symbol of something much darker, something that had been carefully cultivated behind the polished surface of innovation and progress. The reality of what he was up against was sinking in. Musk's empire was vast, SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, the Boring Company, and the world marveled at his visionary genius. But John had uncovered the truth. Musk was not just a businessman or an innovator. He was part of a much larger plan to reshape the very fabric of society. The Vatican, the Pope's death, and the mysterious Order of the New Dawn were all inextricably linked to Musk's ambition to usher in a new world order. It was no longer just about technology, it was about control. The piece of information he had learned from Father O'Connor still echoed in his mind: the next pope will be the key. John had come to understand that Musk's alliance with the Vatican wasn't just a political or financial maneuver. It was a strategic partnership, a means for Musk to legitimize his vision for the future and secure his position as one of the most powerful figures on the planet. John's phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. The message was from a source he had been cultivating for months, someone deep inside Musk's inner circle. The message was cryptic but urgent: the next step has been set in motion. You're too close to the truth. Get out while you can. John's pulse quickened. Whoever this source was, they were warning him. He had been getting closer to the heart of the conspiracy, and now it seemed like someone was trying to put a stop to him. The message felt like a countdown, like he was on borrowed time. There was no turning back now. He couldn't ignore it. He had to act. John immediately called Father O'Connor, his heart racing as the phone rang. The priest answered on the second ring, his voice strained. "John, you shouldn't be investigating this any further," Father O'Connor warned. "You're in too deep. They know you're close to uncovering the truth." John gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. "I know, Father. But I can't stop now. The world needs to know what's happening. The Pope's death wasn't just a coincidence, and Musk, he's the one orchestrating it all. He's in bed with the Vatican, and they're planning to change the world in ways that we can't even imagine." Father O'Connor fell silent on the other end of the line. John could hear the distant hum of traffic in the background before the priest spoke again, his voice heavy with concern. "They'll do anything to protect their plans, John. You have to be careful. The Vatican isn't what it once was. It's no longer just a religious institution. It's become a business, a machine for global control. And Musk, he's the one who's driving it." John's breath caught in his throat. "How far does this go, Father? How deep does the rabbit hole really go?" Father O'Connor hesitated before answering, his voice a whisper. "Deeper than you could ever imagine. They've infiltrated everything, from politics to the highest levels of finance. There's no one they can't control." The conversation left John shaken, but he knew what he had to do. He couldn't let fear stop him now. As much as the warning gnawed at him, he had already come this far. He was a journalist, a truth seeker, and he had made a promise to himself that he would expose the world's darkest secrets, no matter the cost. He pulled away from the curb, his car heading toward a destination that would either bring him closer to the truth, or bury him in the process. He had learned that the Vatican's new leadership was about to be revealed to the world. The chosen successor to Pope Benedict was a man of great influence, someone with ties to the very individuals John had been investigating. The next pope would be the figurehead who would solidify Musk's control over the church and lead it into a new era, an era where technology and religion would no longer be separate, but intertwined in a way that was both revolutionary and terrifying. The new pope's name was Cardinal Alessandro Bellini, and his ties to Musk were well documented. In fact, Bellini had been one of the most vocal proponents of the Vatican's alliance with the tech billionaire, pushing for a future where faith could be enhanced by technology. Bellini's rise to power wasn't just about spiritual leadership, it was about ushering in a new world order that Musk had planned for years. John's mind raced as he headed toward the secret meeting place, the one that had been arranged by his source inside Musk's circle. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew it would be the key to unlocking the final layer of the conspiracy. If he could get this last piece of evidence, he would have everything he needed to bring the truth to light. As John parked outside a nondescript building in an industrial part of the city, he felt a sense of unease settle in his stomach. It was too quiet. There was no sign of life, no movement. He quickly checked his surroundings, making sure no one was following him, before he grabbed the bag containing his recording equipment and documents. The door opened with a faint creak, revealing a dark hallway lined with flickering lights. John stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest as he moved cautiously toward the end of the hallway. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Everything had led to this. And as he reached the end of the corridor, he knew that whatever lay ahead would either make or break him. The truth was within his grasp. Inside the dimly lit room, a figure sat behind a desk, illuminated only by the soft glow of a desk lamp. It was his source, the one who had been feeding him information for months. The man's face was shadowed, but John could see the faint outline of a weary, yet determined expression. "I'm glad you came, John," the man said, his voice calm but laced with tension. "But I'm afraid you're too late." John's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" The man sighed. "The plan is already in motion. Musk's vision for the future, along with the Vatican's blessing, is about to be revealed to the world. And there's nothing anyone can do to stop it now." John's eyes widened. "But we can still expose them. We have the evidence. We have the proof." The man shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. The game is bigger than you. You think you're exposing the truth, but in reality, you're just playing into their hands. They knew you'd come this far. They always knew." John felt a cold wave of realization wash over him. He had been used. All along, he had been led into a trap. The final pieces of the puzzle were slipping away, but John Matthews wasn't going to give up without a fight. He had come too far to let it end here. John Matthews stood motionless in the dimly lit room, the weight of the man's words sinking in. The sense of betrayal hit him like a slap to the face. Every lead he had chased, every piece of evidence he had uncovered, had been part of a much larger plan, a plan he had unwittingly played into. He wasn't just on the trail of a conspiracy, he had become part of it, a pawn in a game far beyond his understanding. His mind raced, trying to process everything that had just been revealed. The mysterious figure in front of him was right. Musk and the Vatican had anticipated every move he made. The carefully planted pieces of information, the subtle nudges in the right direction, it all made sense now. They had allowed him to come this far, to uncover the truth, but only to serve a greater purpose. "What are you saying?" John's voice was barely a whisper. "You mean to tell me that everything I've been doing was part of their plan? That the truth was never meant to be exposed?" The man behind the desk, the source he had trusted, leaned forward, his eyes filled with regret and resignation. "Yes, John. Everything. The truth was never meant to be revealed to the world. You were a useful tool, a messenger for their narrative. And now they're about to reveal their new world order." John's head spun. He felt the walls closing in on him. He had been so certain that he was bringing down a global conspiracy, but now it seemed like he had been walking right into the trap all along. "So what happens now?" John demanded, his voice rising. "What do we do? Is there any way to stop this?" The man's gaze softened, but his tone remained grave. "It's too late, John. The wheels are already in motion. The new pope, Cardinal Alessandro Bellini, is ready to take the stage. And with him, the Vatican will fully align with Musk's vision. There's no going back from this. The merger of faith and technology, what they're calling the New Dawn, is already set to be revealed. The world won't see it coming, but they'll embrace it." John's chest tightened as the words echoed in his mind. The New Dawn. It was the name of the secret alliance, the new world order that Musk and the Vatican were constructing. It was everything they had been working toward. The future of the Church, of humanity itself, would be shaped by this fusion of power, technology, and faith. But why? Why had they gone to such lengths to deceive him? Why hadn't they just silenced him from the start? "You can still stop it," the man said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "There's one last chance. If you can get to Bellini before the announcement, before the world knows, you might be able to expose him for what he truly is. But you have to act fast." John's heart raced. This was it, the final chance to prevent the rise of a new power that could control the future of the world. But the task was daunting. Cardinal Bellini was not just a leader of the Church, he was a figurehead for the new global order, someone with the resources and support of both Musk and the Vatican behind him. "What do I need to do?" John asked, his voice steady now, though his mind was spinning with possibilities. He couldn't let this opportunity slip away. If there was even a chance to stop Bellini and Musk, he had to take it. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. He slid it across the desk toward John. "This is Bellini's schedule for the next few days. He'll be at the Vatican during the public announcement, but there's one event before that, a private meeting with a select few. If you can get access to that meeting, you'll find the final proof of the conspiracy. The truth that will expose them all." John picked up the notebook, his hands trembling as he flipped through the pages. The details were precise: Bellini's movements, the names of those he would meet with, the times and locations of each event. It was all there, in black and white. The opportunity was within his grasp. But something didn't sit right with him. The man had warned him that it was too late, that the world was already set to embrace this new order. Was there even a chance to stop it? Was he just chasing shadows, or could he truly make a difference? He glanced back at the man behind the desk, who was watching him with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "You can't do this alone," the man said quietly. "They'll be watching you. You'll need help if you're going to get to Bellini in time." John nodded, the gears in his mind already turning. He knew exactly who he could turn to for help. He had one ally left in the fight, the one person who had been with him from the beginning, the one person who understood the stakes and was as determined as he was to stop this madness. The next morning, John met with Emily Hayes, a fellow investigative journalist and his most trusted confidant. She had been his partner in this journey from the start, helping him dig deeper into the Vatican and its ties to Musk. She had been the one to encourage him to keep going when the pieces didn't seem to fit. Now, she was his last hope. They met in a quiet cafe, the kind where they could talk without fear of being overheard. John slid the leather notebook across the table to her, his expression grim. "This is it, Emily. The final chance to expose Bellini and stop whatever it is Musk is planning." Emily scanned the notebook, her brow furrowing as she absorbed the details. "This is incredible. If we can get the proof at this private meeting, it will all fall apart. Bellini can't survive that kind of exposure." John nodded, his fingers tapping nervously on his cup. "But it's not going to be easy. We're going to have to move fast. We'll need to infiltrate the meeting, get the evidence, and get out before anyone notices." Emily took a deep breath, her eyes filled with determination. "We can do this. We have to." John's gaze hardened. "If we don't, Musk and the Vatican will control the future. We can't let that happen." As they made their plans, John felt the urgency of the situation pressing down on him. Time was running out, and the clock was ticking toward the moment when Bellini and Musk would unveil their vision for the future. The world would soon be plunged into a new era, one where technology and faith were fused together in a way that threatened to change everything. But John wasn't about to let that happen. Not without a fight. The truth was his weapon, and he was going to use it to bring down the men who sought to control the future. The air was thick with tension as John Matthews and Emily Hayes prepared for their dangerous mission. Every second that ticked by felt like a countdown, the walls of time closing in on them. They had been working around the clock to make sure everything was set for the infiltration of Cardinal Alessandro Bellini's secret meeting. The stakes were higher than ever, and the consequences of failure loomed large. If they didn't act now, the world would unknowingly fall under the control of Elon Musk and the Vatican's alliance, a dystopian vision that blurred the lines between religion, technology, and power. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Emily asked, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of anxiety. The gravity of their situation had set in for both of them. This was no longer just a story, it was a battle for the future. John paused for a moment, staring at the map of the Vatican they had pinned to the wall. "We don't have a choice, Emily. The world has no idea what's coming. We're their only hope." Emily nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "I know. Let's get this done." The plan was simple yet perilous. They would infiltrate the Vatican under the guise of media representatives for a foreign news outlet. Thanks to Emily's connections and some well-placed favors, they managed to secure access to the high-security event, a private meeting of the Vatican's most influential figures, including Cardinal Bellini himself. It was here that they hoped to gather the evidence that would expose the depths of the conspiracy. But there was one problem: they weren't the only ones who had been preparing for this moment. Their every move had been watched. They could feel it, the creeping sense of being hunted, the whispers of unseen eyes tracking their every step. Whoever had warned them that they were playing into Musk's hands wasn't wrong. The game was bigger than they had imagined, and they were up against forces far more powerful than they had ever anticipated. As the night of the meeting arrived, John and Emily stood outside the Vatican security gates, their hearts pounding in unison. The atmosphere was surreal, the centuries-old architecture looming around them, the sacred ground of the Vatican pulsing with an aura of secrecy. Yet beneath the reverence of the location, a far more dangerous game was being played. Emily checked her earpiece for the third time. Ready to go? John glanced around, making sure there were no signs of surveillance, no way that anyone could recognize them. Ready. With a deep breath, they walked towards the security checkpoint, their IDs and credentials already cleared. They passed through a series of checkpoints, each more rigorous than the last, as they made their way closer to the meeting location. Every step brought them nearer to Bellini, the man at the heart of this entire conspiracy. Inside the Vatican, the walls seemed to echo with history, but tonight, the atmosphere felt darker than usual. The stone corridors were lined with old paintings and statues that had witnessed centuries of secrets. John couldn't shake the feeling that the very walls were closing in on them. Each shadow seemed to hold a threat. They arrived at the meeting room, an opulent chamber that was adorned with gold trim and velvet curtains. The air smelled faintly of incense, and soft murmurs of conversation filled the space. The attendees were a who's who of Vatican hierarchy, men and women who held the strings of religious power across the globe. But among them stood Bellini, his presence unmistakable. Tall, dignified, and imposing, the cardinal's gaze seemed to pierce through anyone in the room, his eyes alight with the fire of ambition. He was everything John had expected and more, an intellectual, a visionary, and yet, in every way, a puppet master pulling the strings of a much darker agenda. "Do you see him?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible in the crowd. John nodded, his throat dry. "That's Bellini. And we need to make sure we're not seen." They blended into the crowd, each step calculated, trying to remain unnoticed. But John could feel the eyes on him, the sense of being hunted growing stronger with every passing moment. He knew that their presence here wouldn't go unnoticed for long. The meeting began, and the doors were shut, sealing the conspirators inside. John and Emily found seats along the edge of the room, where they could observe without drawing attention. The sound of the heavy door closing seemed to punctuate the shift in the atmosphere. This was it. Everything hinged on what would happen in the next hour. Bellini stood at the front of the room, his voice commanding the attention of the entire assembly. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his tone calm but laden with an unspoken promise, "we stand on the threshold of a new era. The Vatican's long-awaited partnership with the technological leaders of the world, led by our visionary friend Elon Musk, is about to come to fruition." John's heart skipped a beat. It was happening, right in front of him. The Vatican was not just aligning with Musk, they were preparing to formally announce their new alliance to the world. A wave of nausea swept over him as the implications of Bellini's words settled in. This wasn't just about religion anymore. It was about control over every aspect of human life, from belief systems to the very minds of people everywhere. Bellini continued, his words sweeping through the room like a spell. "With our collective efforts, we shall lead the world into an age of unparalleled enlightenment. The marriage of faith and technology will guide us all to a brighter future. No longer will we be bound by the limitations of the past. Together, we will redefine what it means to be human." John felt a chill crawl up his spine. This was it, the moment when everything changed. But as Bellini spoke, John's mind raced, trying to find any way to stop what was happening. He couldn't let this go on. If Musk and Bellini were allowed to reshape the world in their image, there would be no going back. He glanced over at Emily, who was watching Bellini intently, her expression unreadable. It was clear that she, too, understood the gravity of the situation. They had to get the evidence, and they had to do it fast. Just as the meeting reached its climax, a sharp noise cut through the room, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. The air froze, a collective gasp rippling through the crowd as everyone instinctively turned toward the source of the sound. Panic erupted as people scrambled for cover. John's heart raced. This wasn't part of the plan. Who was attacking, and why? In the chaos, John's eyes met Emily's. There was no time to ask questions, no time to figure out who was behind the attack. They had to act, and they had to do it now. The moment of truth had arrived. John grabbed Emily's hand, and without a word, they dashed for the back exit. But as they reached the door, John caught a glimpse of something that sent a jolt of fear through him. Standing at the doorway, just behind the crowd, was none other than Cardinal Bellini himself, his eyes gleaming with the same cold intensity he had shown earlier, but now there was something darker, something more sinister in his gaze. The game had just changed. John and Emily burst through the door, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls of the Vatican as they sprinted down the narrow corridor. The confusion in the meeting room still lingered in the air, but they couldn't afford to waste time. The gunshot had been a clear signal that everything had just escalated, there was no more room for doubt. They were no longer just investigating a conspiracy, they were now entangled in it, right in the heart of the Vatican's power structure. "Keep moving," John urged, his voice low but urgent. Emily was right beside him, her eyes darting around, alert for any signs of danger. The sense of being hunted had intensified. They knew the clock was ticking, not just because they needed to expose Bellini and Musk, but because they were now targets themselves. As they rounded a corner, John felt a sudden, unnerving sensation, the feeling of eyes on them, watching, waiting. He slowed down just a fraction, his instincts kicking in. Emily sensed it too and reached out to grab his arm. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. John stopped and turned to face her. "Someone's on our tail. We're not safe yet." They both listened in the silence, straining to hear anything. In the distance, they could hear the faint sounds of footsteps, hurried and purposeful. Someone was following them, and the last thing they needed was a confrontation in this labyrinth of corridors. "Do you think it's Bellini's men?" Emily whispered. "It has to be," John muttered. "We've been compromised. We need to get out of here, now." But as they hurried down the hallway, something felt off. The tension in the air had thickened, and the walls of the Vatican seemed to close in on them. They had barely made it halfway down the corridor when they heard a muffled voice, coming from behind them. "Stop right there." John whipped around, heart pounding in his chest. The figure standing at the end of the hallway wasn't one of the guards they had passed earlier. No, this was someone much more dangerous. The man was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and his face was partially obscured by a hood. He wasn't alone. Behind him, two more figures emerged from the shadows, each carrying weapons. The man who had spoken raised a hand, signaling for them to halt. John's mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but they were trapped. The Vatican's high-security corridors offered no easy escape routes, and they couldn't outrun armed assailants. There was only one option: confrontation. "Who are you?" Emily demanded, trying to mask her fear with bravado. The hooded man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "It doesn't matter who we are," he said, his voice cold and calculated. "What matters is that you've seen too much." John's heart sank as the realization hit him. They weren't just dealing with hired thugs or random mercenaries. These men were connected to the conspiracy. They were part of the web of power Musk and Bellini had spun. "Look," John said, his voice steady despite the fear creeping up his spine. "We don't want trouble. We just need the truth to come out. You're protecting the wrong people." The man chuckled darkly. "Truth? There is no truth anymore. There is only the future. And those who can shape it. John's blood ran cold. It was exactly what Bellini had said in the meeting, this wasn't just about power. It was about control over the very future of humanity, over the minds and beliefs of billions. Without warning, one of the men raised his weapon. "Move aside," the hooded man ordered. "You're coming with us." John and Emily exchanged a quick glance. They had to act fast. If they didn't, they would be dragged into whatever dark corner of the Vatican's conspiracy they had yet to uncover. "Run!" John shouted, grabbing Emily's arm. They bolted down the hallway, their feet pounding against the cold stone floor. Behind them, the sound of pursuit was relentless, footsteps grew louder as the men chased them, their shadows stretching across the walls. "We need to find a way out," Emily cried, glancing over her shoulder. "I know," John said, his mind racing. They were getting closer to the exit, but every turn they made seemed to bring them closer to the shadows of the Vatican, closer to the men who wanted to silence them. They couldn't let that happen. Not now. Ahead, John spotted a narrow staircase that led down. It was their only chance. "Down there," he shouted. They turned sharply and hurried down the stairs, but just as they reached the bottom, they were met with another obstacle. A locked gate stood before them, blocking their path. Panic gripped John's chest, but he didn't hesitate. Reaching into his jacket, he pulled out a small set of tools Emily had given him earlier, just in case. He moved quickly, his fingers working with practiced precision as he picked the lock. He could hear the footsteps growing closer, and time was slipping away. Finally, the lock clicked open. "Go," he urged, shoving the gate open just enough for them to slip through. They emerged into the darkened courtyard behind the Vatican, their breathing heavy with adrenaline. But there was no time to savor the moment. They still had to get to safety, and they couldn't risk being seen. The courtyard was eerily quiet, and the shadows stretched long in the moonlight. The feeling of being hunted hadn't gone away. "Where now?" Emily panted. "There's a way out to the east," John said, pointing toward the distant wall. "But we have to move fast." They sprinted across the courtyard, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the night. As they neared the wall, a sudden, sharp noise cut through the air, a click that froze John in his tracks. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, blocking their path. It was Bellini. "Thought you could escape," he said, his voice soft but chilling. There was no trace of fear in his eyes, only cold calculation. "You've gone too far, Mr. Matthews. You've seen too much. But the game isn't over yet." John felt his pulse quicken. This was it, the moment he had been dreading. The man he had been hunting, the one who stood at the center of the web, was standing right in front of him. "You're not going anywhere," Bellini continued, his gaze unwavering. "The truth? There is no truth left. Only what I choose to reveal." John swallowed hard. This was the man who would define the future of humanity. The Pope's death had been just the beginning. Bellini, with Musk's backing, was on the verge of reshaping everything. And they couldn't let him succeed. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The moonlight cast long, eerie shadows across the courtyard as Bellini stood before them, his imposing figure cutting through the night. John's heart pounded, and the weight of the situation settled over him like a suffocating fog. They had come this far, discovered the truth, uncovered the conspiracy, but now, facing the mastermind himself, they were running out of options. It felt as though the very air around them was charged with a terrifying sense of finality. This was no longer just about exposing the truth. It was a battle for survival. "Do you really think you can stop this?" Bellini's voice was cold, calculated, almost dismissive. His hands were folded neatly in front of him, his face betraying no sign of concern. "What you've seen, what you know, none of it matters anymore. This is bigger than you, Matthews. Bigger than anything you could ever understand. John's mind raced. Bellini's words hung in the air like a death sentence, but he refused to back down now. They had come too far, fought too hard to expose the truth. The stakes were too high, and the consequences of failure were unthinkable. "You're wrong," John said, his voice steady despite the storm of fear threatening to overtake him. "This isn't about control. It's about freedom, the freedom to live without your manipulation, without the dark future you and Musk are trying to create." Bellini's lips curled into a thin smile, one that sent a chill down John's spine. Freedom? How quaint. Do you really think the masses will care about your freedom when they're offered the utopia I'm preparing for them? People want safety, John. They want security. They want the world to make sense, and I'm giving them that. They don't want to be led by the blind. They want direction. They want certainty. Emily stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "You're delusional, Bellini. You're not leading them to salvation, you're enslaving them. You're using religion and technology as tools of control, just to feed your own ego." Bellini's eyes flickered with something darker, anger, perhaps, or something more calculating. But he quickly masked it, his composure unshaken. "You've overstayed your welcome," he said coldly. "It's time for you to disappear." Before John could react, Bellini motioned sharply to the two men who had been silently standing behind him. They moved swiftly, their footsteps silent in the night, as they closed the distance between themselves and John and Emily. "We don't have time for this," John muttered under his breath, grabbing Emily's arm. "We need to move, now." They turned and sprinted toward the high wall at the edge of the courtyard. It was their only chance to escape, climb it, get over, and disappear into the labyrinth of streets beyond. But the men were close, too close. John could hear the sound of their footsteps gaining on them, the pursuit relentless. They were fast, trained, and they knew the Vatican's corridors better than anyone. If they didn't make it to the wall, it was over. As they neared the base of the wall, John's thoughts raced. The climb was going to be difficult, there were no ladders, no handholds, but they had no other choice. "Emily, go," he shouted. "I'll cover you." But Emily shook her head, her eyes flashing with determination. "We're in this together, John. We don't leave anyone behind." John didn't have time to argue. They both scrambled toward the wall, their hands slipping on the smooth stone surface as they tried to find any foothold they could. The men were only steps behind them now. John could hear the shuffle of their feet, the clink of weapons being drawn. They didn't have much time. Finally, Emily found a small ledge. She reached for it, using all her strength to pull herself up. John followed closely behind, but as he placed his foot on the ledge, he felt a sharp pain in his side, a bullet, grazing him. He staggered but didn't fall. "Go," he yelled, gritting his teeth as he climbed, pushing through the pain. Emily was already at the top of the wall, her hand reaching down to him. John's breath was coming in short gasps, but he was almost there, just a few more inches. The men below shouted in frustration, realizing they were losing their quarry. With one final push, John grabbed Emily's hand, and together, they pulled themselves over the top. They were on the other side. But their relief was short-lived. As they dropped to the ground on the other side of the wall, they found themselves facing a whole new set of dangers. The street was deserted, eerily so, but that didn't mean they were safe. There was still a long way to go before they could escape the clutches of Bellini's men, and their mission was far from over. "We can't stop now," John said, his voice hoarse. "We need to get to the safe house. It's the only way we can continue the fight." Emily nodded, her face grim. "We have no choice. We have to get the evidence, John. The world needs to know what's happening here." The two of them moved quickly through the narrow streets of Rome, their bodies aching from the adrenaline-fueled escape. Every shadow, every flicker of movement made them jump. Bellini's men were still hunting them, they wouldn't stop until they had silenced them for good. As they navigated the twisting alleys, John's mind kept returning to Bellini's words. The man was dangerous, a master manipulator who had tied himself to Musk's technological revolution. They weren't just fighting to expose corruption, they were fighting for the future itself. If they failed, it wouldn't just be their lives on the line. The world would fall under a reign of control and manipulation that no one could escape. John's thoughts were interrupted by a faint noise behind them. Someone was following them, again. Emily's eyes widened. "John, move." They dashed into the nearest alley, disappearing into the shadows just as another figure appeared. But it wasn't Bellini's men this time. It was someone else, someone who had been tracking them from the very beginning. "Get down!" Emily hissed, pulling John into the darkness just as the figure approached. The figure didn't stop, his eyes scanning the area as he passed. John held his breath, willing himself to remain still. Whoever this was, they weren't the enemy, but they were just as dangerous in this moment. Emily's voice came in a whisper. "Who was that?" John shook his head. "I don't know. But they're tracking us. We need to keep moving." And so they did, knowing that every step they took brought them closer to the truth and closer to the ultimate confrontation that would determine the fate of the world. John and Emily moved quickly, hearts pounding as they ducked into the shadows of a narrow alleyway. The figure that had passed them earlier was still a mystery, but the danger wasn't over. They couldn't afford to take any chances, not with Bellini and Musk's network hunting them down. Every step they took could bring them closer to their goal, or closer to their graves. John glanced at Emily, his face tense. "We need to find a place to regroup. We can't keep running forever." Emily nodded, her eyes scanning their surroundings. The narrow street they were in was deserted, the only sounds the distant hum of the city. But there was no time to enjoy the fleeting calm. Every corner was a potential danger, and they needed a safe house, a place where they could make sense of everything and plan their next move. "We're not far from the old church district," Emily said quietly. "There's a place there I know. It used to be a safe house for people in trouble. We can lay low for a while." John hesitated for a moment, considering the risks. But time was slipping away, and the truth needed to come out. They had no choice but to trust the few people still willing to help them. "Lead the way," he said. They continued down the alley, moving swiftly but carefully. The night seemed to close in around them, the darkness pressing in as they approached the church district. This part of Rome, with its ancient stone buildings and winding streets, felt like another world, a place where secrets could be kept hidden for centuries. It was the perfect place to disappear, if only for a little while. As they reached the church district, the first sign of danger came from the rooftops. A shadow shifted, and before John could react, a bullet rang out, slamming into the stone wall just inches from his head. Emily yelped in surprise, pulling him to the ground. "They're on the rooftops!" Emily shouted, her eyes darting around as she tried to spot the shooter. John quickly surveyed the area. The church district was empty, but the tall buildings provided plenty of cover for their pursuers. The sound of footsteps echoed from above, and John knew they had to move quickly if they were going to survive. "Through the back door of the church," he barked. Without waiting for a response, John grabbed Emily's arm and pulled her toward the nearest building. The heavy wooden door of the church creaked open as they entered, the dim light inside offering a brief respite from the chaos outside. The church's interior was still, its high vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows casting an eerie glow in the gloom. But there was no time to admire the beauty. They had to stay one step ahead of the danger. "Where to?" Emily asked, panting. John took a moment to listen, his senses alert for any sound of movement outside. The church's back door was their best option, but they needed to be sure no one had already closed in on it. He turned to Emily, his face grim. "There's a crypt below," he said. "It's not much, but it'll keep us out of sight." Emily hesitated for a moment but nodded. "Let's go." They moved cautiously toward the back of the church, slipping through the narrow corridors that wound beneath the building. The air grew colder as they descended into the crypt, a stark contrast to the heat of their desperate escape. The crypt was ancient, its walls lined with worn stone and scattered with remnants of past generations. The stillness of the place was both comforting and unnerving. John motioned for Emily to sit near one of the stone alcoves as he leaned against the wall, his breath coming in shallow gasps. They had a moment to catch their breath, but it wouldn't last. The longer they stayed in one place, the more vulnerable they became. "We can't stay here for long," Emily said, her voice tinged with worry. "We need to get that evidence to the right people, before Bellini and Musk find us." John nodded, his mind spinning with thoughts of their next steps. "The evidence we have, it's not just about the Pope. It's about the entire system Bellini and Musk are trying to build. If we can expose them, everything will change." Emily's eyes burned with determination. "And we will. We have to. If we fail now, everything they've been planning, will come to pass. This is the last chance to stop it." A heavy silence fell between them as they both contemplated the magnitude of their mission. What they were up against wasn't just a group of conspirators, it was a vision for the future, a future they couldn't let unfold without a fight. The power Bellini and Musk wielded was immense, and their reach was global. But what they were creating wasn't just a new order, it was a new form of control. They were shaping a future where technology and religion intertwined to form an unbreakable chain around humanity. And that was a future John and Emily couldn't allow. After a few moments, John stood up, his gaze hardening with resolve. "We need to get to the broadcast station. There's a journalist I know, her name's Claire. She can help us get the truth out." Emily looked up at him, her expression unwavering. "Where is she?" "She's based just outside the city," John replied. "But getting there won't be easy. Bellini and Musk's people will be looking for us." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll make sure they don't find us." John's heart swelled with pride at her determination. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. They had to press forward, even if it meant risking everything. Before they could make any further plans, a distant sound interrupted their thoughts, faint at first, but growing louder. Footsteps. Someone was coming down the stairs leading into the crypt. John tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon he'd tucked into his jacket. Emily looked at him, her expression matching his. They weren't alone. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs, shadowed, indistinct. But as the figure stepped into the dim light, they both recognized him. It was the same man who had been following them earlier, the mysterious figure who had been tracking them since they left the Vatican. "You're not safe here," the man said, his voice cold but laced with a strange urgency. "Bellini's men are on their way. They'll be here any minute." John's pulse quickened, and Emily's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man hesitated before speaking again, his gaze darting between them. "My name is Marco. I've been watching you two for a while now. I know what you're up against. I can help you, but we need to leave. Now." John exchanged a glance with Emily. There was no time for hesitation. They didn't have the luxury of trusting anyone, but they didn't have a choice. "All right," John said, his voice firm. "Lead the way." And just like that, they were on the move again. The race against time was far from over. But now, with one more ally in tow, they had a chance. A small one, but a chance nonetheless. Marco led them through the crypt's winding tunnels, his pace steady but urgent. John and Emily followed closely, every step calculated, every noise magnified in the oppressive silence. The faint echo of their footsteps reverberated off the cold stone walls, reminding them that danger was always just behind them, lurking in the shadows. They emerged from the crypt into a narrow, poorly lit hallway. The air was thick with dust, the walls adorned with ancient frescoes and old religious symbols that seemed to whisper of long-forgotten secrets. The building around them was a labyrinth of old structures, its crumbling stonework a silent testament to centuries of history. It was a place built on the past, but now it was a refuge for those in danger, hiding in plain sight. "Where are we going?" Emily asked, her voice hushed, the tension thick in the air. She was clearly uneasy, not just because of the danger that seemed to close in on them, but also because of the mysterious figure leading them through the dark, twisting corridors. Marco had appeared from nowhere, and though he had helped them escape, there were still too many questions. "We're heading to a safe house," Marco replied, his voice calm but with an edge of urgency. "It's an old hideout. Used to be a place where resistance fighters gathered during the war, but it's still in use. No one will find us there." "How do we know we can trust you?" John asked, his skepticism clear in his tone. His hand instinctively rested on the gun tucked beneath his jacket, a habit that had become second nature. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. Marco stopped walking for a moment, turning to face them. His face was partially obscured by the shadows, but John could see the seriousness in his eyes. "Because you need me, and I need you. I've been following you two for a reason. I know what Bellini is capable of, and I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to make sure you survive." Emily's gaze narrowed as she considered his words. "And what do you get out of helping us? Bellini and Musk have resources. You can't just be some random ally." Marco didn't flinch. "I've got my reasons. You'll understand soon enough. Just keep moving. Bellini's men are already combing through the city. They won't stop until they've found you." John exchanged a quick glance with Emily. He didn't like the lack of clarity, but Marco had been right so far. They didn't have the luxury of time to second-guess their options. They had to keep moving forward. "All right," John said, his voice firm. "Lead the way." Marco resumed walking, his footsteps echoing in the narrow corridor as they continued to wind deeper into the heart of the ancient building. The farther they went, the more disorienting it became. The air grew colder, and the walls began to feel closer, as if they were descending into some long-forgotten underworld. They passed through a series of small, dimly lit rooms, each one seemingly older than the last, until finally Marco stopped in front of a thick wooden door. The door was heavy, reinforced with iron bands, and had a small, barred window through which the faintest light could be seen. "This is it," Marco said, reaching into his coat pocket and producing an old, rusted key. He inserted it into the lock and twisted. The door creaked open, revealing a small, hidden room that looked like something out of another era. It was simple, almost Spartan, just a few wooden chairs, a table covered with maps, and several crates piled in the corner. The room felt secure, like an anchor in the storm. But John knew that security was an illusion. They couldn't afford to relax. Not yet. Marco stepped inside first, followed by John and Emily. He shut the door behind them, locking it with the same key. "Take a seat," Marco said, gesturing toward the table. "We've got work to do." Emily immediately moved to the table, her fingers already tracing the map spread out before them. She'd been quiet for most of the walk, but now her focus was absolute. She was in planning mode, her mind already working on the next steps. John watched her for a moment, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. They were so close to uncovering the full scope of Bellini and Musk's operation, but they were also closer than ever to the precipice. Every move they made from here on out could be their last. "Do you have any idea how to stop this?" Emily asked, her voice sharp as she turned toward Marco. Marco crossed the room to a corner and grabbed a dusty file from a shelf. "I have pieces of the puzzle. Bellini's trying to create a new world order, something Musk's technology will facilitate. They're working together on a project, the Neural Gate. It's a system that links the human mind directly to the digital realm. Total control. Absolute manipulation." Emily frowned. "But how does the Pope fit into all of this?" Marco walked over to the table and dropped the file onto it with a heavy thud. He took a deep breath before speaking, the gravity of his words hanging in the air. The Pope was the key to their final plan. He was the one who was supposed to legitimize their operation, to sell it to the world as the next step in human evolution. Bellini knew that with the Pope's blessing, they could unite faith with technology. It would be the perfect combination of religion and power. The Vatican's control would be absolute. John's mind spun at the implications of what Marco had just said. The Pope's death wasn't an accident, it was the catalyst for something far darker. But if the Pope's dead, Emily began slowly, who's left to legitimize their plan? Marco's gaze darkened. That's what we need to figure out. The Pope's death has thrown everything into disarray, but they have contingencies. There's still someone in the Vatican who can step into the Pope's place. And if they do, Bellini and Musk's vision will become unstoppable. John clenched his fists, the anger rising in him. So what do we do now? Marco's eyes met his. Now we go after the people who know what's really going on. We need to expose them before they can put their final plan into action. But we can't do it alone. We need to find the right allies, the ones who aren't controlled by Bellini or Musk. Emily nodded, her determination palpable. We have to move quickly. Every minute we wait, they get closer to their goal. Marco stood up, taking one last look at them before heading to the door. Stay here. I'll go find the contacts who can help us. Don't trust anyone except each other. Bellini's people are everywhere. As Marco left the room, John and Emily exchanged a glance. The weight of the world seemed to rest on their shoulders now, but they couldn't afford to hesitate. They had one chance to stop this, and they had to make it count. The game had changed. And now, they were the only ones standing between Bellini and Musk's vision of the future, a future of control and oppression. It was up to them to make sure that vision never became a reality. The room was silent after Marco left, the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. John and Emily sat across from each other at the table, their minds racing as they processed everything they had just learned. The weight of the situation felt suffocating, but there was no time to dwell on it. The clock was ticking, and every second brought them closer to the moment when Bellini and Musk would unleash their plan on the world. We can't let them succeed, Emily said, breaking the silence. Her voice was firm, but there was a flicker of worry in her eyes. If we don't stop them, the whole world will change, and not for the better. John nodded, his jaw tight. He had seen the scope of Bellini and Musk's operation, and the implications were staggering. They were trying to create a system where every person would be linked to a central network, controlled by the very few. The more he thought about it, the more terrifying it became. They weren't just shaping the future, they were planning to dominate it. We need to get to the Vatican, John said suddenly, his voice sharp. There's no time to waste. If we're going to expose Bellini and Musk, we have to find the person who can take the Pope's place. We need to stop that from happening before it's too late. Emily raised an eyebrow. The Vatican? Are you sure that's our best bet? We don't have a choice, John replied. Marco's right. If someone steps into the Pope's role, their plan will be unstoppable. We need to find out who that is, and fast. Emily hesitated but then nodded. All right, let's get moving. But we need to be smart about this. Bellini's people will be watching the Vatican closely. We'll figure it out, John said, standing up. He grabbed his jacket, checking that the gun was still tucked securely beneath it. We have no choice but to stay one step ahead of them. Just then, the door creaked open, and Marco stepped back into the room. His face was grim, his eyes scanning the room before he spoke. They know we're here, he said quietly, locking the door behind him. They've already started searching the area. We need to leave, and we need to leave now. John and Emily exchanged a glance. The stakes had just gotten higher. How did they find us? Emily asked. Marco shook his head. I don't know. But it's clear they have eyes everywhere. We've got to move fast before they close in. The urgency in his voice was clear, and without another word, John and Emily grabbed what little they could carry and followed Marco through the narrow hallways of the old building. Their footsteps were swift but silent, the only sound in the tense air. They moved as if their lives depended on it, because they did. As they neared the back exit, Marco stopped them. He looked out through a small window, his face darkening as he took in the scene outside. "They're already in the streets," Marco muttered. "There's no way we can make it through there without being spotted." John felt a chill run down his spine. "What do we do now?" Marco's eyes narrowed, and he turned toward a small wooden door to the left. "There's a hidden passage beneath this building. It'll take us out to a part of the city where we can regroup and plan our next move." Without waiting for approval, Marco opened the door, revealing a set of rickety wooden stairs that descended into a dimly lit tunnel below. The air in the passage was damp and musty, and the sound of dripping water echoed eerily off the stone walls. John and Emily exchanged a glance before following Marco into the dark passage. As they descended, the noise of the world above faded away, replaced by the unsettling silence of the underground. The passage stretched out before them, twisting and turning like some ancient labyrinth. They had no idea where it led or who might be waiting at the end, but it was their only option. For what felt like hours, they walked in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The only light came from the faint glow of a lantern that Marco had pulled from his bag. His eyes remained focused ahead, his expression unreadable. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel, and Marco pushed open a heavy wooden door. The street outside was dark, and the city felt strangely still. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "We're out of the danger zone for now," Marco said, looking both ways down the street. "But we don't have much time. Bellini's men will be looking for us, and they won't stop until they find us. We need to get to the Vatican," John said, his voice urgent. "The sooner we can figure out who's taking the Pope's place, the better." Marco nodded. "I know a way. It's not a direct path, but it'll get us close without drawing too much attention." The three of them moved quickly through the quiet streets, staying in the shadows, blending into the city's late-night life. The streets were eerily empty, but the sense of danger lingered in the air, thickening the atmosphere with each step they took. As they neared the Vatican, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, every passerby seemed to be a potential enemy. The city had become a minefield, and they were walking right through the middle of it. They reached a small alley near the edge of the Vatican, and Marco stopped. He glanced around quickly, then motioned for them to follow him down a narrow passageway that led to a hidden entrance. "This way," he whispered, leading them into the darkness once again. They followed him through a series of underground tunnels, the walls damp and cold as they descended deeper into the heart of the Vatican. John could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They were so close to the truth, but there was still so much they didn't know. Every moment they spent here was a moment that Bellini and Musk's plan could come closer to being realized. They reached a small chamber, its stone walls bare except for a few candles that flickered softly in the corners. Marco motioned for them to sit. "We're close now," Marco said, his voice low. "We've got one shot at this. We need to find the man who's next in line to take the Pope's place before it's too late." John and Emily sat down, their minds focused on the task ahead. They had come this far, and they weren't about to stop now. The chamber was quiet except for the soft flickering of the candles in the corners of the room. John and Emily sat, their eyes locked on Marco as he paced back and forth, clearly deep in thought. The weight of the situation seemed to press down on all of them. The stakes were higher than ever, and they had no idea how much longer they could stay ahead of Bellini and Musk. Marco stopped pacing and turned to face them. His expression was serious, his eyes shadowed with concern. "All right," he said quietly, "this is where things get complicated." John leaned forward, his voice low. "What do you mean?" Marco glanced around the chamber as if to make sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice even more. The person taking the Pope's place isn't just anyone. They're part of a very specific faction within the Vatican. It's not someone anyone would expect, but that's exactly the point. They've been waiting for this moment, planning for it for years. Emily frowned. Who are they? Marco hesitated for a moment before speaking again, the weight of the name hanging in the air. Cardinal Ignacio Vargas. The name sent a shockwave through the room. Both John and Emily exchanged a quick glance. Cardinal Vargas? Emily echoed, her voice filled with disbelief. He's one of the most influential men in the Vatican. He's a spiritual leader with the kind of power that could make Bellini's plan unstoppable. But how does he fit into all of this? Marco's expression grew darker. Vargas isn't just a man of faith. He's been working with Bellini and Musk for years, a puppet in their scheme. They needed him to secure the Pope's blessing for their technological project, the Neural Gate. Vargas was the one who would have given them legitimacy in the eyes of the world. John clenched his fists. So the Pope's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a key part of their plan. Marco nodded. Exactly. Vargas has been waiting for this moment. He has the connections, the influence, and the religious authority to legitimize their project. He's the one who would have guided the Vatican's followers into this new age of control and manipulation. And now that the Pope is gone, he's stepping into the role. Emily stood up, her voice rising with urgency. We can't let that happen. If Vargas takes over, it's game over for everyone. He'll give them the power they need to take control of the world. John rubbed his temples, trying to think through their next move. How do we stop him? He's too powerful. And if he's already in line to take the Pope's place, what chance do we have? Marco's eyes narrowed as he spoke, his voice steady but intense. We don't have much time. We need to expose him before he can take office. If we can reveal his connection to Bellini and Musk, we can discredit him. But it's not going to be easy. Vargas has loyalists everywhere, and he's already working on his plan. We need evidence, Emily said. Something concrete that will prove his involvement in this. If we can expose him to the world, we can stop him before it's too late. Marco nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. That's the right approach. But we'll need to act fast. Vargas is already making moves. His supporters are closing in on the Vatican. If we wait too long, we won't have a chance. John stood up, determination setting in. So, where do we find this evidence? Marco hesitated for a moment, his eyes shifting to the floor before he looked back up at them. There's a vault deep within the Vatican's archives. It's a secret place, hidden away from the public eye. Only a few trusted people know about it, and one of them is Vargas himself. Inside the vault are documents that prove his alliance with Bellini and Musk. But it's heavily guarded. If we're going to get in, we need a plan. Emily's eyes lit up. We break in, get the documents, and expose him. Simple enough, right? John looked at her with a raised brow. Simple. This is the Vatican we're talking about. It's not like we can just walk in and take what we need. We'll need to be smarter than that. Marco stepped forward. I have a contact who can help us. He's someone I trust, a former member of the Vatican security team. He knows the layout of the archives better than anyone. If we can get him on our side, we might have a shot. John glanced at Emily, and she nodded. We don't have much time. We have to do this. Marco seemed to agree. We'll move fast. But remember, this is a delicate operation. If Vargas catches wind of what we're doing, it'll be the end for all of us. The three of them exchanged a final, determined look before Marco led them out of the chamber and back into the narrow, winding tunnels beneath the Vatican. They moved quickly, staying in the shadows as they navigated the dark passages. Every footstep was measured, every turn deliberate. The danger was palpable. Every corner could conceal an enemy, every noise could be a warning. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small, hidden entrance at the back of the Vatican's inner sanctum. Marco knocked twice on the door, a rhythm that seemed to be a signal. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a grim expression. "This is my contact," Marco said. "Father Giordano. He used to work in the Vatican's security division. He knows everything about the archives." Father Giordano glanced over at John and Emily. "I don't have much time," he said quietly. "But if you're serious about stopping Vargas, I'll help you. But we need to move quickly." The urgency in his voice was clear. They had no time to waste. "Lead the way," John said. "We're counting on you." Father Giordano nodded and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the Vatican. With every step, John could feel the walls closing in. Time was running out, and the weight of the world seemed to hang in the balance. They had to get the documents, expose Vargas, and stop Bellini and Musk before their twisted vision for the future became a reality. The dim light of a single candle flickered as Father Giordano led John and Emily through the labyrinth of the Vatican's hidden corridors. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became, dense with secrets, whispers of power, and ancient histories buried in shadow. The Vatican was far more than just a religious institution, it was a fortress of secrets, one that even its most devout guardians couldn't fully comprehend. Giordano's pace was steady, his movements precise as he navigated the maze of stone walls, seemingly without hesitation. He didn't look back to check if they were following, but John and Emily didn't need to be reminded. They knew that every step they took brought them closer to the heart of the Vatican's deepest, most guarded secrets, and the truth that could bring everything crashing down. Giordano stopped at a seemingly ordinary door at the end of the corridor. "This is it," he whispered, his voice carrying a note of finality. "The vault where the documents are kept." John felt a jolt of adrenaline surge through him. They were finally here. But the gravity of the situation weighed on him heavily. If they were caught now, there would be no coming back. Bellini and Musk had eyes everywhere, and Cardinal Vargas's influence reached far beyond what they could imagine. Father Giordano knelt to the ground and whispered something under his breath. Then, with a faint creak, a hidden mechanism clicked into place, and the door slowly swung open, revealing a dark, imposing chamber. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged parchment, dust, and old wood. Shelves lined the walls, each one filled with thick volumes and scrolls, the contents of which had been untouched by time for centuries. A single, large wooden table sat in the center of the room, its surface covered in layers of dust, suggesting it hadn't been used in years. In the far corner, a massive stone vault door loomed, its lock an intricate web of mechanisms that seemed impossible to decipher. "This is where the real secrets lie," Giordano said, his voice hushed, almost reverent. "But this is also where you'll find the documents you need. The ones that expose Vargas's ties to Bellini and Musk." John and Emily exchanged a glance, both of them feeling the weight of their mission. They had come this far, and now there was no turning back. If they didn't succeed here, everything they had worked for would be for nothing. Father Giordano moved to the vault door, his fingers tracing the ancient inscriptions on its surface. He muttered something under his breath, then produced a small, ornate key from beneath his robes. The key was unlike anything John had ever seen, small and gold, with symbols etched into it that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "This was entrusted to me long ago," Giordano said quietly. "It's the only way in. But once we open it, there's no going back. We'll be risking everything." John nodded, his expression grim but determined. "We don't have a choice. We have to expose Vargas, and we have to do it now." Giordano inserted the key into the lock, and with a slow turn, the heavy door groaned open. A sharp, metallic sound echoed in the chamber, and for a moment, it felt like the world itself had stopped moving. The door swung wide, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into an even darker part of the vault. "Follow me," Giordano instructed. "The documents are kept in the lower chamber, where only a select few are allowed to access. We'll need to be quick. The vault is protected by more than just security measures. There are other forces at play here, forces that will stop at nothing to keep these secrets hidden. As they descended into the depths of the vault, the temperature seemed to drop, and the air grew thicker with the weight of centuries of untold knowledge. The walls were lined with heavy stone, and the further they went, the more it felt like they were entering another world entirely, one that had been carefully concealed from the outside. Finally, they reached the bottom of the staircase. In front of them stood another set of doors, smaller but no less imposing. Giordano took a deep breath before he turned the handle and pushed the doors open. Inside, the chamber was unlike anything John had ever seen. The walls were lined with shelves, each one containing row after row of documents, most of them centuries old. There were ancient texts, handwritten manuscripts, and a myriad of scrolls, all carefully preserved under glass and sealed in protective cases. But in the farthest corner of the room, behind a heavy iron cage, were a few select documents that would change everything. Giordano moved toward the cage, producing a small set of keys from within his robes. His hands trembled slightly as he unlocked the cage, and then carefully opened it. "These are the ones," he said, his voice soft with reverence. He carefully took out a folder from one of the shelves and placed it on the table in front of them. "These are the documents that will expose Vargas's involvement with Bellini and Musk. Everything you need is here." John and Emily leaned forward, their breath held as they watched Giordano open the folder. Inside were a series of letters, contracts, and photos, each one more damning than the last. There were images of Bellini and Vargas meeting in secret, documents detailing the financial backing of Musk's Neural Gate project, and handwritten notes in Vargas's own hand, outlining his plans for the future of the Vatican under his rule. "This is it," Emily whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "We have everything we need." John's mind raced as he scanned the documents. The evidence was irrefutable. Vargas wasn't just a pawn in Bellini and Musk's game, he was a willing accomplice, a key player in their global scheme. The world needed to know the truth, and they needed to know it now. But before John could say anything, there was a sound, faint at first, but growing louder. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, echoing through the chambers. Someone was coming. Giordano's eyes widened. "We have to go. Now." The urgency in his voice sent a jolt of adrenaline through John. They had no time to waste. They grabbed the folder, quickly stuffing it into a bag, and rushed back toward the staircase. But as they turned to leave, the heavy doors slammed shut, trapping them inside the vault. "What's happening?" Emily asked, panic creeping into her voice. "We're locked in," John said, his pulse racing. "They found us." Giordano's face had gone pale. "It's Vargas's men. They know we're here." And just like that, everything they had worked for was about to come crashing down. Panic surged through John's chest as the heavy doors slammed shut, the sound reverberating like a death knell. They were trapped, and the weight of that realization hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just about escaping with the documents anymore, it was about surviving. Father Giordano's face had gone pale, his hands shaking as he frantically scanned the room. "We need to get out, now," he muttered under his breath. His calm, almost detached demeanor was gone, replaced by a desperate urgency. Emily's eyes darted around the small chamber. "There has to be another way out," she said, her voice steady despite the mounting tension. "A hidden exit or a tunnel?" John's heart pounded in his ears as he tried to think. The Vatican was a fortress, and they were deep within its most secretive layers. There was no time to waste, no time for hesitation. Giordano began, but he was cut off by the sound of footsteps growing louder outside the vault. There was no mistaking the sound now. Someone was coming. They didn't have minutes, they had seconds. "We need to move, now." John shouted, grabbing Emily's arm and pulling her toward the back of the room. Giordano led them towards the far wall, where a set of stone steps spiraled downward into even deeper darkness. "This way," he urged. "There's an old escape tunnel beneath the vault. It was used centuries ago when the Vatican was under siege, and it's still here, hidden, but accessible." John didn't hesitate. He could hear the voices now, muffled but unmistakable, approaching fast. There was no choice. They had to take the tunnel. The steps were narrow and steep, the air thick with dust. Giordano moved quickly, his familiarity with the surroundings giving him an advantage as he led the way. John and Emily followed, barely able to see in the pitch-black tunnel except for the faint glow of Giordano's lantern. The cold stone walls pressed in on them, and every sound seemed amplified in the eerie silence. The only noise was their footsteps, echoing through the tunnel like the ticking of a clock counting down to their doom. "How long is this tunnel?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "It's about a quarter of a mile," Giordano replied, his tone clipped. "But once we reach the end, there's no telling what we'll find. The tunnel opens into the catacombs of Saint Sebastian. It's an ancient burial site, but it's been abandoned for centuries." John's mind raced as they continued down the dark, winding passage. The catacombs? It sounded like something out of a horror story. But there was no time to dwell on that now. Their only chance was to keep moving, to escape before Vargas's men found them. As they neared the end of the tunnel, a faint light appeared ahead, dim, but unmistakable. The entrance to the catacombs. Giordano quickened his pace, and John and Emily followed, their hearts pounding as they neared the end of their escape route. But just as they were about to reach the opening, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them, louder now, accompanied by harsh whispers. They were getting closer. "Damn it," John muttered. "We're running out of time." Giordano reached the tunnel's end and pushed aside a heavy stone slab, revealing the opening to the catacombs. The cold, musty air hit them all at once, and the sight of the underground burial site spread out before them was both eerie and disorienting. Rows of ancient tombs lined the walls, and the shadows seemed to stretch forever. "Stay close," Giordano instructed. "We'll follow the catacombs to a secondary exit. It's hidden, but I know the way." John glanced over his shoulder. The footsteps were closer now. Too close. "Go," he shouted, and they moved quickly, their footsteps reverberating against the stone floors as they entered the catacombs. The air grew colder, and the oppressive darkness seemed to close in on them. But they had no choice. They couldn't go back. The sound of their pursuers grew distant as they pressed forward, their pace quickening. John's thoughts were scattered, but one thing was clear: they couldn't afford to be caught. The documents they carried were too important, and exposing Vargas was their only hope of stopping the twisted alliance between him, Bellini, and Musk. As they navigated the labyrinth of ancient tombs, Giordano led them through narrow passageways, ducking under low archways and squeezing between stone columns. They passed by forgotten relics of the past, forgotten bones of long-dead popes and saints, witnesses to centuries of history, now nothing more than dusty reminders of what had come before. Finally, Giordano stopped at a large, ornate door tucked away in a far corner of the catacombs. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "The exit." John was about to move forward when a voice echoed from behind them. "You're not getting away that easily." John's blood ran cold. He spun around to see two men emerging from the shadows, their figures illuminated by the dim glow of a lantern. They were dressed in black, their faces obscured by masks. There was no mistaking it, Vargas's men had found them. "Damn it," John muttered under his breath. The exit was right there. They were so close. But now, it seemed like their escape had been cut off. Father Giordano stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of calm. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice steady. "You can let them go. You don't have to follow Vargas's orders." One of the men snorted. "Vargas's orders are law. We're not here to negotiate." Without warning, the two men lunged toward them, weapons drawn. The situation had gone from bad to worse in an instant. "Move!" John shouted, and with no time to waste, he grabbed Emily and shoved her toward the door. Giordano followed, but just as he reached for the handle, one of the men grabbed him by the arm. "You're not going anywhere," the man growled. In the chaos, John acted without thinking. He turned, grabbed a loose stone from the ground, and threw it at the man holding Giordano. The stone hit him square in the chest, knocking him off balance. "Run!" John yelled again, and they bolted for the exit. They could hear the men shouting behind them, but they didn't stop. They didn't dare. The path to freedom lay ahead, but whether they would reach it was still uncertain. The cold night air hit them like a slap to the face as they emerged from the hidden exit of the catacombs. John took a deep breath, tasting the freshness of the air, mixed with a hint of smoke and the remnants of the rain that had started to fall earlier. They were outside now, free, for the moment, but they weren't safe yet. Father Giordano, looking every bit as out of breath as the rest of them, adjusted his robe and turned to look down the narrow street. "We need to get to a safe house. Somewhere Vargas's men won't think to look." The streets of Vatican City were quiet, almost eerily so, despite the chaos they had just narrowly escaped. The tall stone buildings loomed over them like silent sentinels, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. John could hear nothing but their footsteps, the soft patter of the rain, and the sound of his own breathing. "What about the documents?" Emily asked, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "We can't just leave them out in the open. They're too important." John clutched the bag that contained a folder of documents, the evidence they'd fought so hard to obtain. The weight of it felt heavier than ever now. It wasn't just paper, it was the key to exposing the dark alliance that had been manipulating the highest powers in the world. Vargas, Bellini, Musk, their schemes could no longer remain in the shadows. But their fight wasn't over yet. "We keep moving," John said, his voice resolute. "We get to a safe place, and then we make a plan. We can't afford to wait around for someone to find us. We need to get this information into the right hands before it's too late." Father Giordano nodded, then gestured for them to follow him. "There's an old monastery not far from here. It's out of sight, and I know the monks there, they'll help us." Without another word, they began to walk quickly through the narrow streets of Vatican City, sticking to the shadows as much as possible. The rain had started to come down harder, washing away any trace of their hurried escape. But even as the streets grew darker and more deserted, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was like something was lurking just beyond their vision, waiting for them to slip up. They were not safe, not yet. As they turned a corner, a flash of light caught John's eye. He stopped suddenly, his heart racing as he scanned the dark alley ahead. There was no mistaking it, the headlights of a car, moving fast, coming around the bend. "Get down," he hissed, grabbing Emily's arm and pulling her into the shadow of a nearby doorway. Giordano quickly followed. The car slowed as it passed them, its headlights briefly illuminating their hiding spot. John held his breath, his pulse pounding in his ears. The car passed by without stopping, but the sense of danger was palpable. "It's too risky out here," John whispered. "We can't keep moving like this." Giordano nodded grimly. "You're right. There's a back entrance to the monastery. We'll take that." They continued forward, now with even more urgency, their footsteps light and fast. They reached the monastery entrance moments later, but it was clear the place had been abandoned for some time. The wooden door was old and weathered, the paint peeling, but Giordano knew exactly where to knock. A hidden latch opened silently, and they were ushered inside by one of the monks, an old man with a face as worn as the walls of the monastery itself. "This way," the monk whispered. "You'll be safe here, for now." The interior of the monastery was simple, but the thick stone walls provided a sense of security they hadn't felt in hours. The monks who lived there were silent, their eyes wise but guarded, as if they had seen far more than they ever wanted to. The room they were led to was modest, a small chamber with a table, a few chairs, and a heavy wooden door that led into what looked like a small cellar. "This is where you'll be able to rest," the monk explained. "But you must be cautious. The Vatican's reach is long, and it won't take long before they find out you've come here." "Thank you," Father Giordano said, his voice filled with gratitude. "We don't have much time." The monk nodded solemnly. "Rest while you can. But know this, the moment you step back into the world beyond these walls, you'll be marked." John and Emily exchanged a glance. They knew the risks all too well, but they also knew they couldn't stop now. They had come too far. They sat down at the table, Giordano pulling out the folder of documents from the bag. John felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, but he knew there was no time to rest. They had to act. "So, what now?" Emily asked, her voice quieter than before. "We need to find a way to get this information to the world," John said, his voice thick with determination. "But we have to be smart about it. If we go public too soon, we'll be labeled as traitors, and Vargas will have all the power he needs to destroy us. We need someone who has the influence to take this seriously." Giordano nodded. "I know someone. A journalist who's been investigating Vargas for years. She's been trying to expose him for some time, but she's been kept under close watch. If anyone can help us, it's her." John's mind immediately began to race. They needed to find this journalist. She would be their key to exposing Vargas and his dangerous allies. But how would they reach her? And even if they did, could they trust her? "How do we contact her?" Emily asked. "She's based in Rome," Giordano replied. "But we can't simply walk up to her. She'll be under surveillance, just like we are. But I know where she meets with her sources. If we're careful, we can get her the information without anyone noticing." John's mind was already turning over the possibilities. If they could get this journalist involved, it would change everything. But they had to move quickly. Every second spent here in hiding was another second Vargas had to figure out where they were. They couldn't afford to wait much longer. "We'll leave in the morning," John said, his voice firm. "Tonight, we rest. Tomorrow, we make our move." The following morning, John woke to the faint sound of rain tapping against the stone walls of the monastery. The air was damp and cool, a stark contrast to the frantic heat of the night before. He sat up in bed, feeling the weight of exhaustion in his bones, but he couldn't allow himself to linger on it. Every minute spent resting was a minute that Vargas's men could use to track them down. Emily was already awake, staring out the small window of the room, her brow furrowed in thought. She looked as if she hadn't slept much, but then again, neither had he. The events of the previous day had been too overwhelming, too intense to allow for any real rest. They'd barely escaped death, and now they were on the edge of an even greater battle. Giordano entered the room shortly after, his face shadowed with concern. "We'll need to leave soon. I've made contact with the journalist, her name is Sofia Ricci. She's one of the few who's been digging into Vargas's past for years, but she's careful. If she's to help us, we'll need to move fast." John nodded, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. He didn't know this journalist, and yet, somehow, he had to trust her. The documents they carried were dangerous, too dangerous for anyone but someone with the right connections and credibility to handle. Sofia Ricci, from what Giordano had said, seemed like the person they needed, but the risks were still enormous. "What's the plan?" Emily asked, breaking the silence. "We'll meet her at a cafe in Rome," Giordano replied. "It's her usual spot, but she's careful. If anyone's watching, she'll be able to tell. We just need to make contact without raising suspicion." "Is she trustworthy?" John asked, his voice low. "She's been trying to bring down Vargas for years," Giordano said with a knowing look. "She's seen firsthand the lengths he'll go to in order to protect his empire. But she's also cautious. Don't expect her to immediately trust us. We'll have to prove we're on the same side. John's stomach tightened at the thought. Trusting someone in their situation was never easy, and Sofia Ricci was no different. But they had no other choice. Time was running out, and the documents had to get out to the world before Vargas could bury them, and everyone connected to them. As they prepared to leave, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The monastery's walls may have shielded them for the moment, but the outside world was still hunting them. They had no idea how far Vargas's reach extended or how soon the network of his allies would close in on them. Father Giordano led them out of the monastery through a back exit, and they moved quickly through the labyrinthine streets of Rome. The city was still cloaked in morning mist, and the cobbled streets were almost deserted as they made their way to the café where Sofia Ricci would meet them. Every corner they turned felt like a gamble, every shadow a potential hiding spot for someone waiting to pounce. John's eyes scanned the surroundings constantly, trying to detect any hint of danger. They had to assume they were being followed, the question was just how long they had before their pursuers would catch up. After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at the café. A small, unassuming place tucked away on a quiet street, it was a perfect spot for someone who wanted to remain unnoticed. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air, making John's stomach growl despite the tension that gripped him. He could tell Emily felt the same way, she was tightly wound, her body language stiff with anxiety. Giordano motioned for them to follow him inside, where they were greeted by the pleasant but nonchalant bartender. "She's already here," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the room. John's pulse quickened as they walked toward the back table, where a woman sat alone, her dark eyes scanning a notebook in front of her. She was mid-30s, sharp features and a confident demeanor. She looked up as they approached, her expression unreadable. "Father Giordano," she said, her voice steady but guarded. "And these must be the ones you mentioned." John offered a small, tense smile. "I'm John, and this is Emily," he said, nodding toward his companion. "We've got something you need to see." She didn't say anything for a moment, just studied them both carefully, as if weighing the truth of their words. Then, finally, she reached for the folder John had brought and opened it slowly. The moment her eyes scanned the documents, her expression shifted from cautious neutrality to something more, surprise, concern, maybe even a hint of disbelief. This is the proof I've been looking for," Sofia Ricci said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But this is dangerous. Very dangerous. Do you realize what you've stumbled onto?" John nodded. "We know what's at stake. But we need your help to expose this, before it's too late. We can't do it alone." She closed the folder carefully and looked at each of them in turn. "I've been following Vargas for years. I know his methods, his power. But this," she gestured to the folder, "this changes everything. If this gets out, it could bring down the entire operation. But it also makes you 3 targets." "We know," Emily said, her voice steady but filled with an underlying tension. "That's why we need you. You've got the connections. The credibility." Sophia's eyes softened, and for the first time, John saw a glimmer of trust. "I've had my doubts for a long time, but this is something I can't ignore. If what you're saying is true, if this information is legitimate, I'll help you. But we need to be careful. Very careful." John let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. They were one step closer, but it wasn't over. It was just beginning. "We'll do whatever it takes," he said firmly. "We have to get this out to the world before Vargas can stop us." Sophia nodded, standing up and gathering the documents. "I'll make contact with my sources. They'll help us spread the word, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take resources. We'll need a plan." "We don't have a lot of time," Giordano said, his voice tense. "Vargas's men are already hunting us down. We'll move quickly, but we have to be smart." "We can't rush this," Sophia replied, her voice cold with resolve. "If we do this right, we expose him and take down everything he's built. But we have to be patient. John glanced at Emily, who nodded back at him. They were in it now, there was no turning back. But with Sophia Ricci's help, they had a fighting chance. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of secrecy and tension. John, Emily, and Father Giordano had moved from one hideout to another, using every connection they had to stay one step ahead of Vargas's men. Sophia Ricci's help had proven invaluable, but their fight was far from over. The documents they had entrusted to her were already in the hands of her sources, but it would take time to secure the exposure they needed. In the meantime, the group had to remain hidden, always one move away from being discovered. Each passing day brought them closer to the truth, but also closer to danger. The air felt thick with unease, as though the walls around them were closing in. They could feel the shadow of Vargas's reach extending further and further, even into the deepest corners of their sanctuary. John couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. Only a few weeks ago, he had been a simple man, working his job and living a life of normalcy. But now, he was entrenched in a battle against one of the most dangerous men in the world, and every decision he made seemed to carry the weight of everything at stake. The documents they had fought so hard to obtain were more than just evidence, they were the key to exposing a web of corruption that had spread far beyond what any of them could have imagined. "What's our next move?" Emily asked one evening as they sat in their latest hideout, a small, sparsely furnished apartment in the heart of Rome. The place was safe for the time being, but John knew they couldn't stay there for long. They had to keep moving, keep being unpredictable. Father Giordano, sitting across from them, let out a deep sigh. "Sophia's message came through today. She's been in touch with the right people, and they're ready to help us, but it's not going to be easy. The Vatican is going to fight back. Vargas has too many allies in high places." "I know," John said, rubbing his temples. "But we can't afford to wait any longer. Every moment we stay hidden is another moment Vargas has to cover his tracks. We have to get this information out there." Giordano's eyes darkened. "And if we make a mistake, it could all fall apart. We've already seen what Vargas is capable of. If we push too hard, he might come after everyone we've worked with, Sophia, the journalists, anyone who dares to expose him. You'll be putting more than just yourselves at risk." John's heart pounded as he thought about the stakes. He knew Giordano was right. The fight they were waging was bigger than themselves, and any misstep could cost them everything. But they couldn't back down now. They had come too far. "Then we have to make sure we do it right," Emily said firmly. "We can't just expose Vargas's operation, we need to expose the system he's built, the people who've been complicit in all of this. We have to tear it all down." John met her gaze. There was fire in her eyes, the same determination he had seen in her from the very beginning. Despite the odds, she never lost hope. That's what had kept them going this far. They were a team, each of them holding on to the belief that together, they could fight this. Giordano looked between them, and then nodded. "All right, we have to move quickly. Sophia has secured a press conference with a respected international news network. It's our best shot at getting the truth out to the world. We'll use this as our moment to make our move." John's stomach tightened. The thought of being in the spotlight, of exposing everything in one fell swoop, was terrifying. But there was no other way. They couldn't wait any longer. "When do we go?" John asked. "Tomorrow," Giordano said. "We'll have to stay in the shadows as much as possible until the moment arrives. We'll need to get to the broadcast station early and ensure everything is in place. We can't afford any mistakes." Emily took a deep breath, then looked at John. "We'll do this. We've come this far, and we can't back down now." As night fell, the trio gathered their belongings and prepared for the most dangerous part of their journey. The weight of their mission pressed heavily on their shoulders, but there was no turning back. Tomorrow, They would take the final step in exposing the conspiracy that had entangled the highest echelons of power. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with anticipation. Rome's streets were quieter than usual, and for a moment, it almost felt like they were living in a parallel world, one where nothing mattered except the mission they were about to undertake. Their footsteps echoed on the cobblestones, and the city felt more like a maze than ever. John's mind raced as they walked, his thoughts moving faster than his feet. What would happen once the truth came to light? Would Vargas have the resources to fight back, to silence them before they could expose him? He had no doubt that the man would try. He had spent years building an empire based on manipulation, lies, and murder. But John also knew that the truth was a powerful weapon, one that couldn't be buried forever. And when the moment came, when Sofia Ricci broadcasted their story to the world, everything would change. By the time they reached the broadcasting station, the sky was a deep shade of blue, the first stars appearing in the distance. It was time. The moment had arrived. Inside the building, Sofia was already waiting for them, her expression tense but determined. "It's all set," she said quietly. "When you're ready, we'll go live." John took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. It was now or never. He looked at Emily and Father Giordano. They had all come so far. Now, they would put everything on the line, expose the corrupt empire, and take down Vargas. Together, they would change the course of history. The cameras blinked on, the lights bright above them, and the world was about to witness the truth. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?